I'm Semaan and I'm a licensed psychotherapist. If you've been to my channel before, thanks for tuning back in. And if this is your first time joining me, thanks for being here. Before I start today's video, let me just provide a trigger warning that some of the contents of this video may be distressing to some viewers. Today I'm going to talk about the differences between schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder, or what used to be called multiple personality disorder. So if you've ever wondered how these two diagnoses are different and you want to learn more about this topic, stay tuned. Let me just remind you to like this video if you found yourself to be enjoying it, leave a comment with any questions or feedback or suggestions for me, and subscribe to my channel, click the notification bell so that you get notified whenever I post new content. Ever since I started working in the mental health field, people have asked me what the difference is between schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder, or what I'm going to call DID for the sake of this video, because otherwise it's a mouthful. So the differences between schizophrenia and DID are quite apparent, and I'm not really sure what the origin is for confusing these two. I suspect it has something to do with the media. Maybe the way it was portrayed in some movies, in some books, could have led to some confusion between those two disorders. Let's start with the general premise of how they're different. If you've watched any of my videos before, you've probably heard me mention the nature versus nurture argument. What that means is that mental health disorders in general are caused by a combination of our biological makeup, our DNA, and any of our life events, our stressors, things we've been through. So a combination of nature and nurture is usually what causes mental health disorders. That is true in the case of schizophrenia. However, in the case of DID, over 99% of cases with DID have had a history of childhood trauma, usually of repetitive, extreme nature, of physical, sexual, and/or emotional abuse. And unfortunately, those cases tend to happen before the age of 6 years old. So this is the first premise of how these two disorders are different, the reason behind why they happen. Schizophrenia appears in around 1% of the population. With DID, I couldn't find very conclusive information on the percentage of people affected. The range that I saw in my research was really big. The range is from 0.01% to 1% of the population. Either way, it's safe to say that millions of people are affected with either disorder, so it's really important to spend some time talking about them and learning how they are different. I'll start by discussing schizophrenia, and then I'll move on to talk about DID more in depth. With schizophrenia, there are two main symptoms that we see in most cases of schizophrenia. Those symptoms are called hallucinations and delusions. When a person has hallucinations and delusions, we usually say that they are having a psychotic episode. Now, how are hallucinations and delusions different? Hallucinations have to do with our senses, how we perceive the world using what we see, what we hear, what we feel or touch, what we smell, and what we taste. So there are disturbances in those five senses in people with schizophrenia who are going through a psychotic episode. Some things that people can see that don't exist are objects, lights, sometimes even people, and sometimes it's scary stuff like zombies or monsters. So what the person perceives is not perceived by other people around them. When we have disruptions in what we see, this is called a visual hallucination. When we have disruptions in what we hear, this is what we call an auditory hallucination. Some examples include hearing sounds or noises, and sometimes we hear things that people are telling us. So we hear actual human voices. In some cases, we can recognize those voices. In other cases, they are just random voices that we've never heard before. Sometimes the auditory hallucinations can be command hallucinations, meaning that the voices is telling us to do something. It's telling us to act on a certain thing. When there are disturbances in what we feel or touch, those are called tactile hallucinations. One example I can give is if a person pets a dog, for example, that isn't there. Or some people experience it as movements inside their body. They can feel that their blood is moving, or they can feel objects under their skin that aren't really there. So those are what we call tactile hallucinations. Sometimes we smell things that aren't there, which is what we call olfactory hallucinations. And sometimes we taste things that aren't there, which is what we call gustatory hallucinations. It's important to note that the most common forms of hallucinations are visual and auditory. The other three could happen, they're just not as common as disturbances in what we see and what we hear. Another main symptom of schizophrenia is what we call delusions. Delusions are fixed and false beliefs about something. When a person has those delusions, even though they don't make sense to us, we cannot really argue with the person experiencing them, because to that person, it is reality. So a person may believe that a celebrity is sending them secret messages through the TV. Or a person may believe that the government is following them because they are a spy agent for an espionage agency. Those are some common delusions that we see in people who are experiencing a psychotic episode as a result of a schizophrenia diagnosis. So we've talked about hallucinations and delusions. Some other common symptoms of schizophrenia are disorganized speech. So a person may use made-up words that only make sense to them, or what we call word salad. It's when one word doesn't connect to the next and they are saying a lot of different words together that in their minds make sense, but to the person listening it might not. Other symptoms include grossly disorganized or catatonic behavior. So this is when a person is acting extremely erratically, or what catatonia is a person is awake, but they are unresponsive. And this is not as a result of physical or physiological or medical reason. This is just a direct result of schizophrenia. And then the last symptom of schizophrenia that's quite common is what we call negative symptoms. This is when a person experiences difficulty in social interactions, so they don't have the same emotional response, like if someone tells you a joke or if someone says some sad news, the person experiencing schizophrenia may not react appropriately and emotionally to that news. So now that we went over the symptoms of schizophrenia, I hope we now have a better understanding of what it actually is before we dive into DID. So as we said before, dissociative identity disorder used to be called multiple personality disorder. The reason the name was changed is that we now know that the personalities within a person are not really mature, distinct personalities, but instead they are disjointed, fragmented sense of that individual person. So in other words, they are different personality states rather than independent personalities. With DID, as we said earlier, that in the vast majority of cases, it is a direct result of severe childhood trauma, usually before the age of 6. Our minds are so smart that they want to protect us from that trauma. So what our minds do is let the conscious self take a step back, so maybe more powerful senses of self can step forward and handle whatever traumatic experience is happening. So for example, I'm Jen, and Jen went through something horrible. So Jen takes a step back while another personality steps forward and deals with whatever is happening in order to keep Jen protected and safe. To diagnose DID, there needs to be at least 2 distinct personality states. By distinct, I mean that they sometimes could sound different, they could look different, their posture could be different, they have different names, they have different races, they are of a different age. So really, they are really different identities of the same person. The person doesn't necessarily choose when the other personality comes out. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The main individual, so in my case, let's say Jen, is who we call the host. The host is sometimes unaware that they have other personality states within them. When one personality state comes through and another one takes a step back, this process is called switching. Now, there's a common misconception that switching is just within 1 second, the second personality state comes through. However, switching can in some cases take a second or 2, but in other cases it can take minutes or sometimes even days to get that whole personality state in the forefront. A common symptom of DID is forgetfulness. And this is not just normal problems with memory. This is forgetting identifying information, such as the name, the phone number, and the address of ourselves. This is because when the new personality state takes over, The host personality is not in the forefront, so they are not conscious of what's happening when the new personality state takes over. This is why it could result in a lot of states of memory loss, or what we call amnesia. So to recap, when I talked about DID, not once did I mention hallucinations, delusions, catatonic behavior, negative symptoms, because those are not what makes up DID. Those are the symptoms that make up schizophrenia. With DID, it's different personality states that come to the forefront when the person or the host experiencing a situation may feel that it is too triggering or too traumatic for them. So our mind protects us by letting the host take a step back and bring other personality states to the forefront that can better handle whatever situation they are faced with. I know this is a very simplistic way to talk about these two big and complex psychiatric diagnoses. However, I felt that it is really important to address them in this way so that we can start having bigger and deeper conversations about each one. So today's video is really just to help you understand on a basic level how these two diagnoses are different and how important it is to recognize the differences within each one. I hope you found today's video to be helpful, and I look forward to seeing you all in my next one.